Hey, check this out. It's from a meeting of Donald Trump with the U.S. governors, Democrats and Republicans both. And Trump heard that one of his executive orders about keeping men out of women's sports was being ignored in the state of Maine. So take a look.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics. Every state has a responsibility to comply with Title IX. They have an obligation, a legal obligation.
That voice in the background is Janet Mills, the governor of Maine. She says she'll see Trump in court. I'm sure she will, and I'm sure she will be able to keep men in women's sports. If it's very important to her, sure, she can. But I'm equally sure that Donald Trump will do what he promised he would do, stop sending federal money to Maine if they don't comply with his executive order. So either one could actually win no matter what the court says. Remember this?
Administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes. From now on, women's sports will be only for women. In recent years, the radical left has waged an all-out campaign to erase the very concept of biological sex and replace it with a militant transgender ideology. We're honored to be joined today by many incredible advocates for women's sports, including the brave swimmer at the forefront of this battle. And Riley Gaines is a person that I've been watching. With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding. With this executive order, the war on women's sports is over. We are restoring sanity and common sense, defending the rights and safety and pride of the American people, including our great female athletes.
That was an incredible visual image. All those young women and girls around Trump, like he was a grandpa or something, protecting them because no one else would. No left-wing feminists would. It was just amazing that Trump took the women's vote because he was protecting women against men. Even more amazing is that it's a Democrat woman, a feminist, the governor of Maine, who would be against that. It's so weird. It's so upside down. I've never been to Maine, actually. It's a small state, 1.4 million people, just a little bit bigger than Calgary. It's the whitest state, if I'm reading my statistics correctly. And I mention that only because it's sort of a classic recipe for what is sometimes called luxury beliefs. There's not a lot of poverty in Maine. There's not a lot of social friction in Maine. There's not a lot of crises. Everything's pretty good in Maine. There's a lot of room for virtue signaling because of that. So they can afford to care deeply about global warming and whatnot, except for that the whatnot here includes letting physical men box or wrestle against women, letting physical men into change rooms with women. And Trump is here to say no to that. Trump ended, as you saw his statement there, with a kind of threat. That's how Trump operates with people who challenge him. The threat was more of a prediction that if she's on the wrong side of that issue, she won't win again. Now, I'm not sure if she's planning to run again. Her term is up next year when she'll be almost 79. Not sure if she'll run again. I mean, Trump is almost that exact same age, but he seems to have unlimited energy. But I think Trump is right. Is Maine so left-wing? I'm not even going to say liberal because the liberals, a true liberal would be for women's spaces and women's rights. Is Maine so left-wing, so radical? That's a better way to put it. That they'll go so far as to be anti-feminist, and by that I mean to let men dominate women's sports. I'm not so sure that it is. And in the meantime, are they fine losing up to $5 billion a year, which is what a cursory search tells me the feds pay to Maine every year. That works out to about $4,000 for every man, woman, and child, around $14,000 a year for a family of four. Now, I doubt that Trump would be able to cut everything off, but even if it was only a tenth of that, would every family in Maine give up $1,400 a year because their hardcore left-wing, virtue signaling, luxury beliefs governor wanted men to be able to wrestle with or play rugby against girls? Or maybe she's just anti-Trump. Maybe she doesn't actually believe in that. I don't know. But here's what I think. I think that Maine is more sane than their governor. I mean, I just think of what Steve Jennings, he's just such a great spokesman. He's on CNN. Here's what he said the other day about Trump and these 80-20 issues.
Trump is like the 80-20 president. He gets on the right side of all these 80-20 issues. Democrats knee-jerk and take the 20. And then what happens? Today, CBS News poll this morning, Donald Trump sitting at a 53% approval rating, the highest he's ever recorded in that survey. Why? Because Democrats are taking the wrong side of all of these obvious issues, number one. And number two, they're giving him an enormous amount of latitude to move fast and break things, which I heard used in a pejorative fashion. But when you're talking about the government, that's what people want.
Well, and Democrats keep
Trump to do.
So yeah, in the last election, I checked, the governor of Maine was elected 56% to 42%. So that's a fair spread, 14%. But it's not like 70-30 or anything. If the number one issue in sleepy little Maine is men in women's sports teams and men in women's change rooms and men in women's prisons, I don't know if I'd be so sure to bet on the Democrats, especially if their incumbent governor runs again, and especially if Trump manages to punish the state for her, I'm going to call it anti-feminism. But here's my point, besides showing you that wonderful, wonderful video. Trump is so good on his feet. But here's my point. Could we get this same sort of thing happening here in Canada? If Pierre Poilievre were elected prime minister, could we ever get to a position where our prime minister would come face to face with an intransigent opponent? In this case, someone who seems to be violating a legitimate federal order. And would Poilievre say, I'm going to punish you with the full force of the law? I don't care that you're a governor. Because, and I'm not an expert, but I think it's fair to say that Canada's prime minister actually has more power within our system than the U.S. president has in their system. Not in all regards. But let me give you one example, the appointment process. We've just seen Trump's nominees go through a vetting by the Senate. One of them was withdrawn. I'm talking about Matt Gaetz. We don't have any vetting of cabinet picks or of judges in Canada in the same way that they do in the U.S. That's just one example. I think the Canadian Prime Minister actually in many ways has a lot more power in Canada than the U.S. president does in their system. So I think a lot of people around the world are looking at Trump moving fast and breaking things, as Scott Jennings said. And I think a lot of people in Canada and the UK and Australia and around the world are thinking, hey, why can't that be us too? If Pierre Poilievre wins this year, and I think he will, he should take Trump's approach, move fast, break things, ignore the media, and do so many things so fast using his executive authority that the Liberals don't have time to react to the latest thing because he's already moved on to the next thing. It's the only way he'll be able to fix what's so deeply broken.